Xpress Outdoors, State of Waterfowl, presented by Grosse Savanne Lodge. Special thanks to Lone Cypress Duck Club. In this special edition of State of Waterfowl, we welcome Arkansas Game and Fish Commission Waterfowl Program Coordinator Luke Naylor to discuss the state of waterfowl in Arkansas.
I'd like to welcome everybody to this edition of Xpress Outdoors State of Waterfowl series. My name is Doug Miller with Grosse Savanne Lodge and host of Xpress Outdoors. And if you've been following the Xpress Outdoors State of Waterfowl series, you know back in mid-July we got together at Grosse Savanne Lodge down in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and basically sat down with a group of individuals that represented all of the Mississippi Flyway and just talked all day about what is the state of waterfowl. What do we know? What is going on with the migration patterns, and basically where are all the ducks and what is their condition? And we know there's a lot of questions out there, and we just wanted to create an educational format to try to educate you as a listener and a viewer to know what's really going on flyway wide. And if you haven't watched that series, we encourage you to go back and listen to those videos and those podcasts and just get a feel for what's going on in the waterfowl world. And so today we've moved up into the Arkansas region. It's our duck split down in Louisiana, and so we made our annual trip up here to Stuttgart, Arkansas, and we are pleased to be hosted by the Lone Cypress Hunting Club. These guys do a great job of managing for waterfowl here, and it's always exciting every year to come up and make a hunt with them. And we thank them for letting us use their lodge today to host this podcast. So today our guest, if you watched our last video series, you know Jim Ronquest is here today. This is his home territory. We're glad to have you back today.
Thank you, Doug.
And we also have Luke Naylor today. And Luke is with Arkansas Game and Fish. And what we want to do, you know, just as the name of our series is State of Waterfowl, we want to move up state by state if we can. And we kind of focused a lot on Louisiana during our last conversation. And Larry Reynolds gave you a lot of insight into what was going on in Louisiana. So today we want to sit and just pick Luke's brain and find out what's going on in the world in Arkansas up here. So Luke, we're pleased to have you with us. For the viewers and listeners who are not familiar, why don't you give us a little brief history on who you are and who you work for and what do you do?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm Luke Naylor. I'm the Waterfowl Program Coordinator for Arkansas Game and Fish. Waterfowl biologist, duck biologist. It's had a bunch of different names, but I've been here about 13 years, I guess now. So it's not my birth home, I guess, but it's my adopted home at this point. So so I grew up in South Central Kansas. Started duck hunting back there in the 80s, back in the dry times, I guess, right when it was 30 days and a couple greenheads and you were done. That's when I got hooked on duck hunting out there. Went to undergrad in wildlife up at Kansas State, actually, and then spent some time out in California for grad school and work on waterfowl management. A lot working with private lands waterfowl management out there, and then made our way back here again back in 2006. So I've been here, and you know, people. What I do day to day, it kind of just varies all over the place what this job is, but kind of whatever involves waterfowl, wetland habitat projects, as far as overseeing those things. Administratively, I'm involved in that, waterfowl monitoring, research, that kind of stuff. So kind of a fun job. It allows you to do a whole bunch of different stuff.
Well, we're glad to have you with us today. I know you got a great reputation in the waterfowl world and really looking forward to picking your brain. Louisiana, we're in the coastal zone where we're at Grosse Savanne. We're in the middle of our split right now. We just finished a 30-day run on our first split, and you know, everybody was trying to guess what's going to happen this year. You know, is it going to be better than last year? And you know, and as we talk, we may get into some of the details. It wasn't our best first split, but you know, at Grosse Savanne, we were fortunate. We did kill some birds, but we have the flexibility to move a lot and bounce around and kind of manage our pressure that we put on our birds. And that was allowed us to, I think we ended up 4.1 birds per man, which it didn't feel like it, but I think that's really, really good considering the conditions we've had.
That's very good.
So
what's species composition makes up that 4.2.
So we're, gadwall is probably our number one species, and this year, unfortunately, we probably shot a few more divers than we typically would do, just because that's about all we had at times. So, but we're glad to have them under the conditions we've had. So,
Beats not shooting ducks.
Yeah. So here in Arkansas, y'all have got a 3-split type setup for your seasons, and if I'm correct, the second one just opened yesterday. I believe we met the opener.
That's right.
That's correct.
So what's going on in Arkansas? How was y'all's first split? What's all the talk? What are we seeing in Arkansas this year?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. I know Jim probably been out there doing a little bit more than me even, or talking to folks. I think just overall better than last year. Given that last year was kind of set the bar on the low side for a lot of folks. A lot better this year, just kind of more. There is no normal. We'll probably talk about that more later. There's no real average, but it feels, I think, more like your kind of typical year. Some of the folks who manage a lot, provide habitat early, had the typical pretty good hunting success early, like they're kind of used to over many years, and so that kind of keeps people rolling right along, a little more settled down maybe than what happened last year. By this time last year, as you're well aware, in Louisiana and here, and lots of other places across the mid-continent, by this time the screaming was getting loud already.
Right.
Yeah, there's definitely, just being around the shop and through my travels, I've heard way more here at home, way more fair to good than poor to fair. For sure. And I know of 2 or 3 places around, nice private tracks that are well managed, that are having over the top exceptional duck seasons thus far. So overall good. We got some water. I think that makes a difference. You got some water in the White and Cache River Basin. And I think anytime you have that, it helps us in general. They're waterfowl, so where that water is, they tend to show up. So I think that's a big help for us right now. If we had some more food on the landscape, I think it'd be even better. But migration's kind of going pretty good. We're getting some cold fronts, got some cold weather kind of pushing again. So I think it's helping. It's certainly a better year than last year, but we're a long way from our halfway point yet. So, there's a lot can happen between now and then.
So we started the season out in Louisiana. I think we had the lowest recording for November since 1969 in population. So we started out with low numbers, and then we had probably one of the biggest cold front pushes that I can remember in a long time for us. Cool temperatures within the first 3 or 4 days of the season. We actually had ice one morning, which rarely happens for us. So we had a decent opener, and then we went through a real bad lull for about a week to 10 days where you didn't see a duck. And talking to all the duck clubs down there, it was rough. And then, of course, you guys' season wasn't even open yet. So I think, the coastal zone in Louisiana was the only thing open for 2 full weeks before any season from southern Missouri south was open. So evidently we pressured the birds we had, and then the cool front may have moved some of the early migrators out, and we just had a really bad lull. But it did pick up towards Thanksgiving after you guys opened up. So I don't think we're, the taste in Louisiana hunter's mouth is still not good.
Well, the ones I talked to, I still
we've got some historical areas on our properties that they're just not seeing ducks, and that's what it's surprising that we've had 4.1 birds, because it doesn't feel like it, and there's just when you go to the duck blind and you sit there and you don't see a bird in the sky for a half hour at a time, and you still may kill your limit. You work the birds you see, and they finish well, and you kill them. But as a whole, we just don't see the birds, So now, since we've been up here, we've seen quite a bit just riding around on the roads and stuff. So, but you talked about water, and I think that's a key component for us, because we're actually in a mini drought down south right now, which is highly unusual for us going into December, and we're still running plows over the ground down there.
So that's not good.
So that's key, and it just gets back, and you mentioned it earlier. We were talking when you first got here about habitat.
Oh yeah.
And this whole series has been an eye opener for me to just see how much of a lack of habitat we have. And people in Louisiana think, we got the marshes, we got the rice fields, you guys have the rivers and all the rice that's up here. But even though all of that's there, the food's not there anymore. And Why don't you talk a little bit about habitat in Arkansas? What's going on with habitat here?
Yeah, I think we got some similar things going on. Although unfortunately for y'all down there, it's a little bit, maybe a lot farther advanced in Louisiana. Just maybe both in the coastal marsh and in the rice growing regions in Louisiana. And the problem is in both places, I kind of see it's like a slow bleed. You just can't. It's one of these things that isn't happening real sudden to just catch people and say, wow, there's something changing. But if as I've talked to old timers, been here, I'm starting to get to the point where I've been around over a decade, so I've seen a fair bit of this variability that's natural for this area. But over the long run, you kind of get to a point where we had all these forested wetlands, right? Way historically, we're talking thousands of years ago, right? This whole place was a large swath of forested wetlands that provided lots of habitat for mallards, and that's why they came here and largely why they still come here. Then as that was lost, you had a bunch of ag ground that was pretty beneficial to ducks, real beneficial to ducks in the case of rice. I spent a fair bit of time, of course, in California managing ducks. And same concept there, these are our surrogate wetlands we always talk about. And that those habitats are super important. You just cannot overstate the importance of rice to waterfowl. But if you look at how that whole industry has changed, and I know I talked about this a bit in your previous series, and in every conversation we have here, we try to hit on this, that what's happening kind of right before our eyes is that what's actually under the water there in those rice fields now compared to what it was 20 or 30 years ago and immediately after those things were cleared or rice really took off in the Delta here, it's drastically different. You can throw the numbers out there. There's been good research done at places like Mississippi State that show that you went from 30 years ago where you'd have 400 pounds per acre of rice in a rice field by the time ducks arrived. And now we're sitting at about 70 pounds per acre. And that's kind of that's the currency, if you will, when we're talking about ducks, because that provides duck energy, and that's what over the winter we think is most important to waterfowl. And if you think that some other research indicates that maybe ducks feed until there's about 50 pounds per acre left at a particular site, particularly in ag fields. So you start doing the math there. You think about the marginal value to ducks, right? From 70 to 400 pounds per acre, there's a lot of wiggle room there. There's a lot of opportunity for ducks to feed. And now when it's 70 to 50, you get a good pile of ducks in a rice field, and that's an overnight dining experience right there is all that is for any decent group of ducks. So, but those changes are subtle. They happen over a period of years to the point where, yeah, we still got 1 million acres of rice. We still got 1.2 million acres of rice in Arkansas. What's wrong? And you got to think about what's actually provided on those acres now. And you think about the rice varieties that are available now, and that does lead into earlier harvest, leads into that decline in food availability when ducks arrive. The other part of it, Larry Reynolds, you mentioned, he likes to tell the story of one of his first real jobs, if you will, out this way. Well, actually out in California was to pick out food in rice fields, and a whole pile of it was weed seeds. So you had all this rice and you had all these weed seeds to provide that diversity and additional pounds per acre. It's gone. All of us know now you drive around a rice field in August and September, and boy, there's not a whole lot of weeds on the levees. There's not weeds in the field. There's not weeds as far as you can see with binoculars in most places, right? It's clean. And so all of that adds up to, and then you scale that up to 1 million plus acres that we've relied on for so many decades. And that just changed so drastically that you just got to take a step back and think, wow, maybe that has something to do with what we're seeing with changes in duck distribution right now. And you add it up in Louisiana. So you're talking about the two most important wintering states for waterfowl in North America. And we've probably experienced some of the most drastic change, I would say, in the past 20 or 30 years. My friends and colleagues farther north would definitely make the argument that you think about mid-latitude states and northern states, a lot of their habitat loss was 100 years ago, where the habitat loss in Arkansas was 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, right? It's different. Maybe Heck, time flies. 150 years ago in the prairies, right? Because they're a whole lot easier to convert. And their wetland loss levels were over 90%, where in Arkansas and Louisiana, our wetland loss was 40 to 60%. Yeah, we kept more on the landscape, but the quality of those that remain, I think, has really dropped during the same time period where all those mid-latitude states are actually they're putting wetlands back on the ground. They're providing better quality habitat. So it's like this, it's kind of this flip-flop scenario where I think we were riding the high through the 70s and the 80s and well before that, of course. And now it's just kind of, that scenario's changed. And so, I think now we've got to think really hard about what we can do as a waterfowl management community in cooperation with duck hunters and the agricultural community. Our job is not to go out and knock on some farmer's door and say, this is what you will do. We don't do that.
Right.
We don't want to do that. We don't have any intention to do that. But what can we sit down and do cooperatively to come up with a plan to help provide some of that habitat that used to be there?
And I think you said it too, I think the days of passively shooting ducks is over. In Louisiana, we killed ducks because we had ducks. And we had ducks because the habitat was there. We didn't do anything. We woke up, you went to your lease, and they were there. But you talked about, the habitat, and even though some of that habitat hasn't been lost, it's the quality of it is not there anymore. And in our case, we're dealing with rice fields that have been converted to crawfish ponds, which is a huge deal in our part of the country. I mean, we had over 200-some thousand acres of crawfish reported last year, which didn't exist 20 years ago. And so when you look at it, and we experienced this on our own property the other day, because we're in the crawfish business too. It's all an economic thing. And we were dealing with propane guns, trying to keep the geese out from eating the stubble. And you don't think about a propane gun in one field, but our lodge was hunting blinds on either side of that field in adjacent fields, and it was blowing our ducks out on each side of that even, So when you start looking at crawfish area wide and how many pop guns, and now they're doing strobe lights at night, which is keeping the ducks from being able to rest at night, those impacts just go way further than I think the average citizen understands. And then in our marsh situation, we got salvinia, which, a lot of guys are out there now and they say, well, my pond don't have salvinia in it today. But if it had it during the summer and it blocked the sunlight out, it blocked all your aquatic growth out. And then whether the weevil got it or you sprayed it, that all fell, and that just coats the bottom and smothers everything out again. So whether it's a rice field or even in the marsh, that quality of habitat has changed so much. And I keep using the time frame of the last 20 years. If we just look at what's happened in 20 years, everything's changed. I mean, we even just look at cell phones as an example of how cell phones have evolved. But even so, from technology, so has habitat, so has agriculture, so has the economic drivers that we put into the ground for us, what type of crops we plant. And if you just look at that nationwide and flyway-wide in the last 20 years, I think, and like you said, it's been so slow that all of a sudden now we're waking up and saying, hey, what the hell happened here, And it's hard to put your finger on one thing. There's just so many things going on.
It's like it kept stacking up, nobody noticed, and then bam, the stick broke, and everybody's like, wow. Yeah. And using that 20-year time frame, I think makes a lot of sense. As I think back through my career and growing up hunting and fishing, the 99-2000 duck season, we talk about the class of 99. But for here, the duck season of 99-2000 was terrific. We talked about it the other night. I remember that year we had a BPOP, a mid-continental mallard, like 11.2 million, something like that. We had great weather conditions. We only froze up one time that year, but the mid-latitude northern tier states stayed froze up. We had a big pile of young ducks, and we shot the fire out of them. I had one duck hole, one blind that year killed over 1,500 mallard ducks in one little old hole. And it wasn't everybody was having those kind of duck seasons. I think we did a lot there. That was the first year the spinner was really prevalent in this part of the world. My buddies on the academic side may disagree with me, but I think we super educated mid-continental mallards with that thing to a point. Not that they still don't work. That combined with habitat loss and hunter ethic changes, I think it's combined to a lot of it. we still remember what it's supposed to be. We know what we want it to be. Hard thing is, can we get it back to that? And I think we all need to think to that direction. Habitat, is the number one thing to take care of our resource, in my opinion, is increased habitat, more duck energy days. So we talk about rice as surrogate wetlands. In our part of the world, a lot of people go to corn, a lot of people go to moist soil. But Luke, explain about duck energy days, and I think a lot of people miss this point. Ducks was eating grass before there was ever rice or corn on our landscape. Yeah. So explain how a good moist soil crop will feed more ducks longer than your basic cornfield or rice field.
Yeah. So I always have to just kind of politely grin when I'm in this part of the world and here, being, again, adopted hometown, but I'm still an outsider of sorts, and a lot of people. I know my buddy Larry in Louisiana is still an outsider after 30 years in Louisiana, but I hear people talk about ducks coming to Arkansas for rice. Like, well, yeah, they do, but the ducks were first. So the ducks came here before the rice came here. I mean, they didn't all of a sudden see shocked rice back there when they first planted it here on the Grand Prairie, and then ducks flying around and say, "Oh, I think I'm going to come to Arkansas." No, they were here for the forested wetlands. Probably on the Grand Prairie was one of our big non-forested areas, but it probably had a lot of seasonal temporary wetlands on it. That what we would call them moist soil wetlands that had, and heck, it probably, growing up and learning wetland management in the prairie wetlands of Kansas, you got to get your mind back into this disturbance cycle, right? Where there was a flood, where there was rain. You think about a big herd of buffalo coming across there. That's basically a disking, right? And it didn't dawn on me till the wetland manager, my mentor in this thing, kind of explained that to me, how that process would work. So we had a series of those type of natural wetlands, forested wetlands in Arkansas here. So we had those moist soil habitats. We had really functional forested wetlands, both of which provided a lot of food and a lot of diverse resources like Jim was getting at there. So those type of natural wetlands provide that diversity that's super important for a duck throughout the annual cycle, throughout the winter. And I know Mickey Heitmeyer in your last series, speaks a lot about this. A lot of his work was about that kind of almost biochemical type stuff and the way ducks process these things. So they need all these different resources, and that's why we like these natural wetlands, moist soil wetlands, and bottomland hardwoods can provide these diverse resources that we look at it as like a moist soil unit. If you're to look at a moist soil wetland, it might be the type of place that for 100 days, it could host 1,000 ducks all 100 days. And a cornfield might host 10,000 ducks for 2 nights. And it's just a different resource need. They're coming in there for those ag crops, those corn. It's basically like eating potato chips to them. When I'm teaching classes or teaching kids about basic waterfowl biology, I always describe those type of ag crops as like eating potato chips, and you could make it through the winter. I mean, you and I could just do nothing but grab sacks of Lay's tater chips and eat them all winter. We'd probably survive, but we would not be very physically fit, and we'd probably have a real hard time finding a mate. And so that's the same thing with ducks. They've got to have this diversity of resources, and those high energy foods. That's what you get out of ag crops, corn, rice to some degree. These other crops that kind of people turn to sort of fill that. They're doing what they think is best to try to fill that energy gap, and I'm not going to criticize that at all. But it's filling one resource need, and that's it. And so you really got to think about this complex. What we try to do with game and fish is think about the complex of wetlands and the diverse amino acids, proteins, and energy you find from a moist soil wetland or a bottomland hardwood wetland. And when you find almost entirely energy from a cornfield or a rice field, and you think about the complexity there, it comes back to just structural complexity too, right? If you think bugs all have these aquatic invertebrates all have a different life cycle and a different substrate or different plant surface or soil surface that they can grow on. And you think about, corn's just a grass, rice is just a grass, and they're pretty simple, right? There's a lot of matter out there, right? There's a lot of straw and there's a lot of leaf matter, but it's all really simple, simple blades. You go out to a good bottomland hardwood wetland and look at the forest floor with all the different types of leaves that are on the ground there, all the different nooks and crannies really that bugs can get into. You go to a moist soil wetland, it's got broadleaf plants in it like smartweed, like other complex plants. You've got all these different resources that can grow on those, and they all grow at different times throughout the season, and ducks use those different resources all throughout the season. And tying it back to rice again, you go back to, again, 20, 30, 40 years ago, a fair number of those plants were in rice fields. Farmers probably didn't appreciate it a whole lot, but they were there nonetheless, right? You had those, at a better level, you had those diverse resources even in an ag field. And so that's gone away. And so you kind of had the best of both worlds in rice 20, 30, 40 years ago. So we're, as managers, we're trying to, promote this complex idea of diversity of wetland habitat types.
Buffets. I'm all for
Buffets,
the better
yeah.
off your buffet is, I think the better off your duck use will be.
It is, and the longer it'll be, more consistent.
Yeah, have a little bit of everything. Hot food, have moist soil, lots of protein. You see these ducks around here, once we get in January, when they get to bugging or hit bean field, just sheet water in a soybean field, and little green shoots starting to come up. That's what they're after there. They change a little bit. We just need to learn how to hopefully educate people more to where they'll be more willing to do so. I think that will help us a lot in the future.
In talking about rice, it's super important. We got to maintain our rice fields, even though I know we've talked about the quality of it being down, but the infrastructure, being able to have the levee systems, the pipe drops and that kind of stuff, the water to be able to manually put it there is extremely important. And even though we may not have that wild seed base that the farmer doesn't want because it's a weed for his crop, even the rolling of that stubble first end of the season may not be that important, but when that stuff starts breaking down later on and you start getting invertebrates and all that decomposition of that rice stubble, that's huge for late season stuff. So I don't want the listeners to think that we're downgrading rice farmers by any means, because it's super important that we maintain this stuff.
I think if anything, the frustrating part is every rice farmer you talk to said he's been fighting grass all his life. They don't want grass,
Exactly.
and chemical companies have done a better job getting where we can kill it. From their perspective, I understand it. From our perspective, I'd like to see more grass, barnyard, springle top, smartweed in a rice field.
Well, and in our case, down at Grosse, Savanne, the land that we hunt on is basically in a lot of cattle pasture and rice cattle rotation, and we've actually had to stop grazing our cattle the off season of the rice because there's not any grass left for the cows to eat, just from the residual effects of all the chemicals that have been applied over the last few years. So if we can't even do our rice cattle rotation, what's that doing to a duck? Because that fall plowing, when that field's idle, there's nothing there once we plow the field. It's a desert.
Yeah, it's a biological desert.
So not only are we having a monoculture type situation during the crop year, the idle year, we're not seeing the grasses that we typically see. So it's kind of a tough situation. But you mentioned corn earlier and the value of it and that kind of stuff, and you can't hardly have this conversation without talking about corn.
Yeah.
And then what's funny is if you go to stop at the convenience store in South Louisiana and talk to duck hunters, they're going to say, oh, they all hung up in Arkansas. Well, we come up to Arkansas and you guys complain, well, they're all above us in Missouri, and the complaints just keep bumping the problem up the flyway. So it's interesting to see that it's not all about the guy just above you. But what's your thoughts on corn? And we know that hunting clubs are planting corn and doing food plots. I mean, that's a known thing.
It's a good thing.
Now the question is, and there's guys out there that are saying that that's the problem and that's short stopping ducks. Is it what's your thoughts on that? I know at this point we discussed it in our previous series, is that we don't have a quantification of how many acres is that, and if it is it enough? And then you just mentioned it's capable of holding a duck or a lot of ducks a night or two, but it's not really long-term sustainable habitats. What's your thoughts on what's going on with corn and food plots above us?
Yeah, so I don't think it's dramatically changing what duck hunters throughout the flyway are seeing day in and day out. I think I'd much rather spend my time thinking about how we can improve habitat right here than worrying about somebody else growing corn 500 miles north of me. It just, frankly, because it's not productive for me to worry about that. It's not. What are we going to do about that? Even if every mallard, I guess maybe if every mallard in the mid-continent stopped there on a cornfield in Missouri, then maybe we'd start having a conversation. But when they're shooting half the mallards every year that we shoot in Arkansas, it's kind of hard. Those folks have a hard time getting real worried about us down here in Arkansas and Louisiana, when the next best state for mallards in the country is Missouri in some years, and they're shooting half of what we do in Arkansas. And our seasonal duck harvest per hunter in Arkansas and Louisiana. Now, Louisiana's taken a legitimate dip the past couple years, but you look at the long run, those guys have a real hard time building up a lot of sympathy for us down here. But corn, it's not. I don't think it's definitely not the. It's not the scapegoat people make it out to be. I think it's important at certain times of the year. I think it provides food energy that may be pretty valuable to ducks at certain times of the year. My counterparts in Missouri, right? We all work within these things called joint ventures. We plan for waterfowl habitat needs based on energy and stuff. And you could take the boot heel of Missouri, look at the energy that they're kind of due to provide to support duck populations in the boot heel of Missouri. They could take one section of land out there and plant it in unharvested corn, and on paper have the duck energy days needed to meet all the habitat needs for all the ducks they're supposed to support in Missouri. So that issue of scale becomes really, really important, right? So if that's to say that there is a lot of energy there, no doubt. If somebody's got the resources to plant corn and not harvest it, and that's not cheap, if they've got the ability to do that, yeah, they're putting a lot of energy for ducks out on the landscape. Whether they're actually changing the way birds distribute throughout the flyway, I think that's an entirely different question. I think having that quantification of what is actually out there in the next few years will help us all. Managers, duck hunters, everybody kind of get on the same page, at least have a common conversation. Like, okay, are we talking about hundreds of thousands of acres here, or are we really talking about 20 here, 40 here, that sort of thing, right? That's going to be important. We've talked about that already. We've got partners. We're working on that. But I still, you look around here in Arkansas, right? And we've got several folks here who leave unharvested corn, unharvested
right up the road. I was going to comment too.
Not far away from where we're sitting,
right?
And just regularly, our folks who fly 4 times a year fly aerial waterfowl surveys during the day, and they hardly ever make recordings of large numbers of mallards on those cornfields. Now, if you go out at one of them at night,
be a different story.
And you watch them come in at night to feed, yeah, you're going to see a pile of ducks. You'll see a show. You'll see a show at Hollowell Reservoir on a moist soil wetland as well. You'll see a show that impressed waterfowl biologists that have been all around the world. Literally, we've had them standing there at Hollowell and watch them come into the moist soil wetlands. But yeah, those cornfields will pile up some days. But that's not changing where ducks are during the day when people are trying to shoot them, by and large. I'm speaking in generalities here. And when those birds need it, we are, as Jim described, the season of '99, where it never really froze much here, right? Mm-mm. So that's when ducks are needing that high energy shot of carbs, right? When you come out of the woods on a cold day, man, nothing like a pound of a Snickers bar and hot chocolate real quick, right? I mean, that feels good to us because you can get some quick energy, quick calories. One of my first few years here, a little quick story. I remember driving down, didn't have a boat yet. I'd be driving down to Biome to learn. I don't mind walking, and I'd drive down there with me and my dog riding shotgun, and was doing it regularly, and not getting in a fight in an early morning crowd, but driving right at daylight, so I could get there and walk in these flooded woods. I came around this corner. These guys had a cornfield, and you see these guys out there, spinners going and hunting like crazy on 40-degree nights, and just looking at pretty much empty skies. I remember one particular day it dropped down to 20s, maybe the upper teens. And I come around that familiar bend in the road, and it's just a steady line of waterfowl, mallards, white fronts, everything, cruising this certain direction. Man, where are they going? And I come around the corner, and they're they were just beelining right to that cornfield. Not a soul hunting it. But it was that cold day when those ducks needed it. I didn't see them in that field like that again the rest of the season.
I'd also add, too, I think something cornfield does offer, not something necessarily promoting for them, but that thermal cover. And maybe some pair bond isolation, too, later in the year. And bugs, all that. So it's not a bad thing. I was just at a place last week. I was on a road trip to Kansas and Missouri. We hunted a place in far western Missouri. The people are adamant about management and resource management. It's very neat property. And they couldn't plant as much corn as they normally do because of the floods this past spring on the Maridazine River. But they did get a millet crop in. I don't know if you got that picture I sent you or not, but it's 120 acres of millet, and it was slap full of mallard ducks, So there's other good, I don't know, call it food plot crop, call it whatever you want to call it, but it'll do really good next year. And when I was trying to talk them into doing this, guys, do this instead of planting next year. Just let that field go natural. Get some good flooding dates on it, and it'll even be better next year.
Diversity.
Yeah,
just all about diversity.
Right. And if you look at the harvest reports for last year that U.S. Fish puts out, you would think if one area is short-stopping the ducks, then the kill ratio in their area would go way up. But if you look at the numbers state by state, there's nobody picking up Louisiana's deficit.
Nope.
If anything, everyone's staying the same, and in some
right.
cases, they actually went down.
That's right.
Well, pressure there, too, I think, not to cut you off, I think you got to look at hunter numbers, too.
Right.
If you take, like, Arkansas, we had 104,000 state duck stands we sold last year. So you got to look at how much, hunter pressure there is equal in the harvest. So using Missouri back as that example, I think you see them pretty flat, so carry on.
And you can argue how that information is collected. I mean, you're probably more familiar with that with anybody. But it's just interesting to see that still Louisiana killed a lot of ducks, And one of the things I wanted to ask you this question, too, because you guys keep talking mallards, and that's why we come up here. Nothing like shooting a greenhead in the timber. I mean, that's the tradition that just abounds in this area of the country. So in our part of the country, coastal Louisiana, we're not known for a big mallard killing area. We kill our share, and we have in the past, but that's not our bread and butter. We're more gadwalls, pintails, shoot a lot of teal, blue wings, and green wings, shovelers. We got our divers and stuff. So all of our information, a lot of our studies, and all of what you guys are talking about, and all the people are talking about short stopping with corn, we're talking mallards.
Yep.
What happens to the rest of the ducks? What's the other species doing? Why are they not coming to Louisiana? And are they in Arkansas? Do y'all see masses of gray ducks, pintails? Where are they?
That's a good question. I think I asked you last night, and another friend of mine, Ira McCauley, and I were talking about this very thing. Where's all the gadwalls and green wings and widgeon at? Where's all the pintails? Where are they? I've just traveled up in pretty good country in the mid-latitude states, in good duck country, and we saw very few little ducks. And I like throwing some green-winged teal and widgeon decoys, pintail decoys, and spread adds color.
When you have green-winged teal, that's your limit fillers.
Yeah, buddy.
You kill your few big ducks, and a couple of flocks of green wings come in, you drop your bunch of teal, and you got a limit.
Yeah.
But when you don't have those, you miss them. You don't realize, that I didn't kill no green wings today for fillers, and I don't know. That's what's strange to me is that, when everybody gets in these big debates and arguments, it's all about mallards. Mm-hmm. But we're forgetting all the other species of ducks
that are
what's
important,
going on to them.
especially to y'all. I would think gadwall, green-winged teal, and pintail would be extremely important in South Louisiana.
That's what I sit up here from where we sit. It's kind of, you kind of got to scratch your head a little bit when there's lots of concern, I guess, is maybe a word, or angst, or complaining is another word about corn in this place or another, right? And I'm kind of sitting back like, well, wait a minute. My understanding of Louisiana is that the green-headed yellow-billed monster was never the king. So wait a minute. We're talking about a duck. That's the duck that eats corn. Yeah, sure. You'll see a gadwall. You'll see a green-winged teal in a cornfield. Sure, you will. Nobody's going to deny that. But by and large, that's mallards doing that. So what in the world are folks in Southwest Louisiana? Why are they worried about corn in Missouri? Because it's stopping. If it were to stop anything, it would stop mallards, and they weren't coming there anyway in huge numbers. So maybe us in Arkansas should be concerned about it, because they did come here, but they still do. That's the bottom line. The mallards still do come to Arkansas when we get water. The little ducks, that's a tough one, and I think Gadwall, with you explained it well earlier. The changes in the coastal marsh and the submerged aquatic vegetation, given the Gadwalls more than any of those other species, is a greenery eater. They're a lettuce eater, and that stuff is gone. So maybe those birds, for a period of years, the fastest growing so-called wetland type in the country was farm ponds, because lots of people building farm ponds all across the landscape. And I've often wondered, what's that doing to ducks distribution? Maybe there's, SAV, submerged aquatic vegetation, on some of those farm ponds where gadwall are spreading out throughout the country. That's really kind of an unknown. But nobody, like you said, nobody talks about them a whole lot, but it's kind of the bread and butter. And it's in our top 5 every year for harvest in Arkansas. Lots of breaks, people shooting them in Cypress Tupelo breaks, that kind of stuff around here. Pick up a few in a rice field from time to time. But you're talking, if those habitat changes were happening and distribution changes were happening, it'd be with mallards. And, back to the harvest numbers, it's what did happen last year, though. It's interesting to look at this as you go over multiple years, that you have your typical top 5, let's say, if you look at seasonal duck harvest per hunter. And it's typically Louisiana, California, Arkansas. Mississippi's jumped up there a couple times. They were the year before last. Texas is sometimes up there. You have kind of those, you'll have somebody like Washington State jump up there because they're shooting a bunch of mallards in a few places with not too many hunters. And of course, California, if I didn't say that already, but 107-day season, a lot of diversity out there. So they got a pretty good chance to get a good whack at ducks. But when I looked at that this year, and I've been showing this during presentations to our commission, when you take what happened last year, compare it to the 2017-18 season, where you had this nice little curve where, the states who always get the ducks kind of got them, right? And you boys, last year, that just jumped all over the place. The seasonal duck harvest per hunter was just a shotgun effect all across the country. And I think that we talk a lot as managers about these absolute numbers, duck hunters or numbers of ducks shot. And I kind of wonder if hunters don't experience the variability. They actually kind of feel the variability more than they actually think about the absolute part of it, right? If it's way down from their previous years of experience, well, then the sky is falling. Typically, if it's way up, they don't notice that quite as much because human nature is to focus on when it doesn't quite go our way. But there have been some real changes, and talking to Larry early in y'all's season this year, I mean, it's concerning to me as a waterfowl manager in the Mid-Continent what's going on down there, and again, to circle back to habitat, and you made a good point earlier. I want to hit on again. I mean, we by no means are mad at rice farming or rice fields at all. They 1.2 million acres, give or take, this past year in Arkansas, and you think about what we're doing as a state public land manager for ducks. And we've got about 10,000 acres of intensely managed moist soil wetlands. That's it. 10,000 acres. And we've got 1.2 million acres of rice. And we've got less than 60,000 acres of green tree reservoirs or impounded bottom and hardwood forests. So you think about that. We got 60 to 70,000 acres maybe that Game and Fish is actively managing for waterfowl, compared to 1.2 million acres in rice. You want to know where we can move the needle for landscape scale habitat availability for ducks? And we're going to keep doing everything we possibly can to hold up our end on public lands. But I think reestablishing that cooperative working relationship with today's farmer and conservationists. There's folks working with rice sustainability, and keeping rice on the landscape is so important to us in the long run. I'd rather have it there and be able to work with farmers to tweak it than to see it go away. But man, there's so many changes with the efficiencies in rice we've already talked about. You think about the way It's managed now too with the increase in zero grading, precision leveled, zero grade fields, right? And you kind of maybe think, what does that do to a duck? Well, okay, you start adding that up, and it's super important because that's going to allow them to maintain water efficiency to keep rice 50 years from now. So I understand exactly why. But you think about those odd contours at the bottom of the field that would catch rainwater all winter.
And that feathered edge.
Feathered edge, and nobody was trying to do that, right? I mean, a farmer could walk away from it and not have any intention to manage for ducks or duck hunters, and they would be providing habitat just pretty much by accident. Now, with a zero grade field, 24 hours. If that structure's open, I mean, it's 24 hours in a lot of places, and that water's downstream, and it's gone. And so
we witnessed that a couple weeks ago.
We sure did. It was here right before the season.
We had a lot of ducks, had a lot of water on the landscape, and it's gone.
Yep.
And then you talk about where the water is. There's a gun.
Yeah. Somebody's trying to shoot you.
Pressure. And we're guilty of that. I mean, we're not going to pump up a place unless we're going to hunt it.
It's cost.
We're fortunate enough at Grosse Savanne, we have such a large acreage. We manage our ducks by bouncing around and we rotate.
Right.
Yeah.
So y'all don't keep a managed definite sanctuary within your place.
We've had to do away with that just because we don't have the acreage for it. Even though we have a lot of acreage, it's not dedicated for that. And so what we've done in the past, and we've had a lot of leasing programs outside of our lodge, we've had to pull all that back. And basically we hunt 9 blinds a day, and we've got almost 80-some blinds that we have the opportunity to hunt. And so our number 5, 6, 7, and 8, 9th guide may never hit the same blind twice in a split, even, if he's got to bounce around. And that's, you can kill some ducks here one day, and you may not kill them again there for another 2 weeks. You got to let things rest. And so that's our whole key is flexibility to move, So you talked about, we were talking in our previous series about, I think the term was used, fetish for stability.
Yeah, that's Larry.
Yeah, that's one of Larry's terminology. Oh, yeah. So, but it actually is pretty dang accurate when you think about it. Is we want things to stay the same.
We don't like change.
And when you're managing, whether it's ducks, fish, or whatever, is population doesn't stay stable. It's either coming or it's going. Marsh management, it's either coming and it's going. And it's hard for people to comprehend, well, I had this type of grass here last year and I don't have it this year. Well, there was a transition going on, whether it was salinities, weather, there's all kind of factors that play into this. And I think the same thing can be said about ducks, is you can't stockpile a resource.
Nope.
We know that. And so that's where the harvest comes in, and we manage our harvest. And in years past, we know we've had lows in population, we've had highs, and it's all cyclic. And so the question is will this thing rebound again? But I think the difference now versus 20, 30, 40 years ago, it's not whether the duck population rebounds, it's the difference in habitat that's changed. And that's not a reboundable thing in my mind when you look at some of the changes that have been made. That practices in farming are not going to be cyclic.
Now, and you're not going to get everybody to come along with us with the idea of having grassy rice crops either. That ain't going to happen.
Exactly.
So we got to find ways to get around that. And I don't know how that is.
And I think, prime example, we're sitting here at Lone Cypress right now. These guys wouldn't kill ducks if they didn't put money into the habitat that they got.
No, sir.
They don't have a big area here, but they manage it very well, and they take care of it. And it's not just showing up week 4 duck season to brush a few blinds.
Mm-mm.
And whether it's Green Tree Reservoir or even a rice field, or in our part of the country, we've got a lot of cow pastures and a lot of idle crop land. And a guy, he's riding around looking for a duck lease, and he comes up to a field that's 6 feet tall in grass, but it's still got the remnants of the infrastructure of a rice field. He's going to say, dude, I don't want that. I'm not going to pay for that. But, dude, there's a lot of potential there. A lot of potential there. A guy jump in there and do a July plowing and catch a little bit of afternoon showers and the millets and stuff that he would get and catch water.
Be better
so
than what he thinks.
I think we got to change the mindset of a guy riding around looking for a duck lease. He's looking for that primo rice field with pretty levees and all that. And I think there's a lot more value in some of that land we're overlooking, and it may take a big group effort of us to change the mindset of what is a place that we can manage for ducks.
I think it's educating people. And I'm going to back up on one thing that Luke kind of hit on and you just hit on. What these folks do management-wise, one of the things that I believe helps this part of the world maintain its presence as far as the duck hunting opportunities and the destination is, besides Arkansas Game and Fish, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, there's probably more private rest areas in Arkansas, Prairie County than there is Game and Fish or U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And there's some places that put a lot of money, a lot of effort into waterfowl management. They've got guys working for them to train, work hand in hand with the people who really know the private land biologists that come help them out. If we take that away, it would really, really hurt us. And they have set aside sanctuaries that are absolute refuges, and you see the importance of that. And we've all heard people talk bad about, man, them dang refuges are holding up the ducks. Man, them ducks might stay in that refuge, but they leave it. A guy that works at UAM was showing me some stuff the other day on some mallard studies they've done, like Paul Link, and he showed me where Drake had been in this region, and I'm like, man, if it wasn't for them rest areas, he wouldn't have nowhere to go. But nobody's got him yet either. And it had a rain event. He moved out here to the prairie, and he hung around out there. And then water come up, he went over here to Bottoms, and seen how much lateral movement he had from the prairie to the river. And I thought that was so cool. Things we've always said and watched, but how important that was. And using different private tracks around. It all comes together, and the better we can get people working together, understanding it, I think the better off we are. I think one of my jobs as an outdoor communicator, I need to work more with y'all. We need to do a better job trying to help educate the public somehow, some way. I think that's one of the tickets to avoiding that long-term change that we don't want to see. However, you're not ever going to stop evolution. It's just going to keep on keeping.
It's going to keep going. That's what you mentioned about Doug's radio mark birds down there. That's part of the reason you'll never hear me say or write the word holding ducks, because once you just pay attention to ducks, or you put a radio on one or two of them, and you realize real quick there ain't anybody can hold a duck. Those suckers are going anywhere they want to go.
They got wings.
You'll never hear me say that. Nobody can hold ducks anywhere, because you think they are, and you hear people talk about sanctuaries for years now, and they're just holding all the ducks right there in one spot. And we did a bunch of GPS transmitter mallard work years ago now. I mean, gosh, it's pushing 10 years ago now since we had a lot of them, and we had one particular bird. These are all one bird anecdote type stuff, but I think you can still it can open your mind at least. It's not hardcore, repeatable science in some ways, but it can really point you in some certain directions as far as investigation. I know, again, with what like Paul's doing with white fronts down there in Louisiana and stuff, it kind of helps you think about where to go with your next questions. And those birds, we had birds that go all the way up to the breeding grounds and come back down, and she'd park herself on Hollowell Reservoir. And right in the thick of hunting season, you'd have all these points during the morning when duck season is open, when she's out there dabbling around in the huntable areas on Biomeda and on private lands adjacent, private rest areas. We're all in this together. It's the bottom line. Right. I mean, these whole complexes are. I'm glad you said that, Jim, because the importance of private land management. I know it is in Louisiana. It's a lot of places now, because we as the public land managers, we have a small piece of the puzzle, and that private land management, we've counted on it for a lot of years, and now you got this kind of break where you've got some folks who are really like, wow, man, we got to get intense to maintain our duck hunting. And then you have a casual side of things it's not that they don't care. It's nothing like that. It's just that it's like, wow, well, the ducks have always come to these rice fields, and we're just going to keep. There's always somebody from Memphis who's going to come over and lease them. So, what are we worried about? And then you get the clubs that are really focusing in intensive effort. So you're kind of getting this split, of intensively managed versus kind of casual stuff, which they get different results too. And, I had a long-time farmer and landowner really opened my eyes to this a while back as he's watched. I'm not going to age him because I'm not sure what his age is, but a few decades older than me, maybe a couple at least. And he says he's watched that, as the ag landscape has changed and all those little odd fields that we were talking about that would grow weeds or catch water in the winter. And, one big thing he hit on that I didn't even think about, he said that's the place where a guy would just call up the landowner and go on a weekend and go duck hunting. And I hadn't thought about that.
That's a good
that
point.
part of it. So here's a spot where maybe a more casual duck hunter could just every once in a while, he just slide over there, talk to the farmer real quick, say, hey man, you got some ducks in this little corner. Can I go hunt them? And that'd be about it for the year. That may be that guy's only duck hunt. Maybe over, a holiday break or something, he'd go out there and duck hunt with his family. A lot of those spots are gone. And then that point that individual made was really hit home with me.
It makes a lot of sense too.
About for ducks and duck hunters, those little odd spots like that.
And duck hunter recruitment,
Yep.
bringing young people into the sport. It gives them a way. It's kind of really switching gears from the management side of things, but hunter recruitment's important. Bringing young hunters into the sport and having an opportunity to teach them right. Not just something they see on a 30-minute TV show or they watch on some video or whatever. They didn't have nobody show them. They see how that's all condensed into a short period of time, so they think it's got to be like that. I do want to back up. I should have said his name better. The gentleman with the duck telemetry stuff from UAM would be Doug Osborne.
Right.
I should have mentioned his name proper earlier. But that's really cool stuff. And Doug and I talked about that the other day, back to the kids. He works with a lot of kids there, as you do. Finding ways to recruit kids back into the sport to learn it the right way, I think is important. From Canada down. You talk to folks up there, you'd think that every kid up there would have him spinner, go sit in a barley field and go shoot a bunch of ducks, but it's not really happening. I think you look at Canada harvest, it's all American harvest. And Devney had some interesting stuff back in the summer on Saskatchewan mallard harvest from the 70s compared to now, and it's like not even a quarter of what they used to shoot up there.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty neat stuff. There's a lot out there. There's a lot to do. The main thing is through venues like this that we can keep getting in front of people and maybe help bring all these different points to light and maybe contradict some rumors. It's easy to have a conspiracy theory, but and they're all fun to talk about. Heck, we all got them. That being said, though, the more we can work with folks like Luke and Mickey and Larry and different ones to bring all this to light, we can maybe start getting everybody on the same page, because the biggest thing that's going to hurt duck hunters is duck hunters. If we can't get everybody together and going the same direction, it's going to get us. Because I think we got too many people man, that dude likes to hunt with spinners. He doesn't know how to duck hunt. He's no good. Them guys, all they want to do, they're mallard purists. All they want to do is kick the water and blow their duck call, and they won't shoot a duck till he's 20 feet away. All these people want to do, they just want to shoot them sailing across the treetops. All these people want to be pass shooters. Well, man, we're all duck hunters first. And I think the sooner we recognize that and go, okay, what can we do to better the resource and better the opportunities, then however you want to go play, you can go play. We got to figure that out. I think there's a lot of that going on amongst us that's not good for the sport.
Yeah. Switching gears back, you mentioned Osborne, Paul Link, and the telemetry stuff, and it's hard to have a conversation about the duck hunting world right now without bringing that up, because the technology is improved unbelievable on putting these collars on birds now and watching where they go. And in our case, we were the heart of white-fronted goose, specklebelly country. Yeah. That, man, we used to just wear them out, and they have vacated our area. And I know you guys just seem to be holding more and more of those. And I'm kind of switching gears here talking about geese, but at the same time, I want to tie that into the duck hunting world, because Paul Link has done some great research with white-fronted geese and showing their movements. And Bobby Cox back in the late 80s, early 90s did some telemetry stuff. We know now that when we say birds moved out of the area, we're not talking about jumping over to across the next highway up the road, and we're not talking about just the next county. We're seeing ducks move completely all the way back from coastal Louisiana back into Arkansas overnight. Big moves, and come back the next day, And so I think even though, like you said, it's a small sample pool size and it's hard to draw conclusions, but it is shedding some light that maybe we don't know everything we thought we knew about duck movement and stuff. And one thing that makes me think down at Grosse Savanne is if a spuckabelly can leave southwest Louisiana and end up back in Stuttgart overnight, and you look at that distance, the distance from South Louisiana to the Yucatan to Mexico and those areas, it's no different to cross the Gulf than it is. So, typically when we look at our records and the success we have and weather conditions, when we have an approaching front, we kill a lot of ducks, and then we'll get that second, third, fourth day after front where we call it stale weather, clear blue, no wind, very cold. We don't kill ducks at Grosse Savanne. I mean, it's dead. That's our lull. And the minute the wind goes back to the south, temperatures jump back up in the 50s, even lower 60s, we go to whacking them again. And so, in my mind, I'm looking at these specklebellies that are going backwards on us, and say, well, is it possible for our ducks when a big front comes to move the next step down? Mm-hmm. And then south wind roll back up? Because you look at the Gulf is just a hop, skip, and a jump for a duck that's coming from Missouri to Louisiana. The mileage is the same.
Right.
And looking at Paul's stuff and talking about habitat and why are these specklebellies moving up. And I don't want to divulge all of his information because his studies are not year conclusive yet, but we've looked at the maps, and there's already been a couple of birds made the flight from Canada straight to Louisiana, hit the Gulf of Mexico without stopping and do a U-turn and come back up. Mm-hmm. And then he just put one on Instagram last week where a goose left northeast Louisiana, flew to the Gulf. I don't know how many miles offshore this thing went, made a big loop 12 feet off the water, just flying the Gulf looking, comes back into Louisiana and just makes a big circle. Like where can I go? And in my mind, I'm thinking of a bird coming to Louisiana, he's flying down, and historically, he knows there's going to be habitat there, and all of a sudden, he comes down on a rice field, and now he's got crawfish pots and a pop gun going off. Right. So he moves over here, and then he moves over there, and before you know it, he's like, the hell with this, I'm going back.
Well, he's lost a lot of that traditional habitat.
And so Paul's got, 4 or 5 years of that where we're starting to see some patterns. So if a specklebelly can do it, why can't a duck do it? And so we're talking short stopping. Are we short stopping, or are we turning around and sending them back because we don't have a place for them to live? I don't know.
I guess the most shocking thing out of that whole comment there was that Paul links on his Instagram. But I want to think about that for a minute. But, we found similar stuff with the GPS marked mallard. Now, it's like antiquated technology compared to what Paul's using now. But, we had... I think it was a drake at the time, left Prairie, Canada, left Saskatchewan, and rode a 50-mile-an-hour northwest wind. We went back and looked at the weather data and stuff, and that sucker bugged all the way down to maybe the Boot Hill in Missouri, maybe Arkansas. I can't quite remember. No, maybe it was just stopped first in Iowa, which is still about 900 miles straight line distance in about 12 hours. It was 12 hours between points, and it did the whole leap, gone. Nothing to it. And I think I like to tell hunters a lot. You try to get the message out there that, guys, there's nobody up there in the prairies with a big bucket of mallards pouring them out, and they're all they're doing is running downhill towards the Arkansas Delta, where, by gosh, every mallard ought to come to die, right?
That's exactly right.
That's where they ought to be sent to die. There's nobody up there with a bucket, and there's nobody saying that they could just go in one direction and that's it. We're sitting here right now, and there's a little bit of a south wind picked up this afternoon. One of those kind of cold, cool days, not cold right here where we're sitting. Drive down here today, there's not many ducks out in the fields right now. And what happened? Did they jump 100 miles north here on this little south wind we just got today? Maybe, probably. Northeast Arkansas, southeast Missouri. I bet you they maybe are seeing a few more mallards than what they were. We had marked mallards that would, during duck seasons, when Missouri closed and we were open, they would flip back and forth. We'd have a bird that stayed in northeast Arkansas and would jump when Arkansas closed for a minute. It'd be in Arkansas, and when Missouri closed season, it would be in Missouri, and back and forth. I think 2 or 3 times it went back and forth within the same wintering period. So yeah, these are all they're all just anecdotes. They're all just one bird. You got to be careful with that stuff to not make it as a previous colleague called them collar and faller type exercises where it's just gee whiz type things. But I think what it can help us do is really open people's eyes, biologists and hunters alike, and say, wow, these things are not just, migration is not unidirectional. It's highly variable. These birds are responding to habitat, and white fronts right now may be one of the best bellwethers of that for us, right? Especially y'all in Louisiana. Wow, what are these speckled bellies doing, and why are they doing it? And again, like we've talked about, y'all are so far advanced on habitat decline. Again, we've talked about how it's declined here as well. But relatively speaking, to a goose looking for options, when the guns start shooting in Louisiana, it's probably a lot better option for them to come up here, find a whole bunch of rice fields, flooded or not, they can still forage in them, and generally less hunting pressure on geese. You still have a large number of duck hunters in Arkansas who want nothing to do with any kind of goose. Now, Max Prairie Wings is selling a whole lot more speckled belly decoys and calls than they used to, and I bet you Jim would say their speckled belly call sales there at RNT have gone up over the past 10 years quite a bit. So there's more people doing it, but it's not the I don't know how many year tradition it is there in Louisiana, but I mean it outdates all of us.
It's like mallards to Arkansas is what speckled bellies was to us,
So they'll cut back up here where again it's all relative to them, right? How many resources, relatively speaking, how good are the resources here, and relatively speaking, how is the hunting pressure? And if a bird's sampling that environment, a goose is going to come up here and think, well, not think, but respond to that relatively low hunting pressure and relatively high habitat availability. It's why mallards come here when it rains. Yeah, there's a lot of guns in Arkansas. I know a good friend of ours, Jim and I, our wetland biologist, he had my counterpart from Texas came over here a few years ago, and he hunted up and down one of the river bottoms, I guess. And I think he left that couple days of hunting just like, man, your poor ducks here just want a place to sit down. There's so much hunting pressure. They're just gunshots everywhere. But there's still a lot of habitat where they can go find a place. Exactly. Again, relative to other places where they could go. People always talk about Missouri. There ain't that much habitat in Missouri. There's a few awesome complexes, really awesome complexes. And their pool partnership, state, federal, private, do a phenomenal job up there, and they should be commended for that. But again, the acres they got over the landscape, I mean, a good part of that state is Ozarks.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to use an example there, kind of to your point. Clay and I's good friend, Ira McCauley. He's in the big middle of that, and I know when he comes down here, he's like, good Lord, the ducks got lots of opportunities to go, lots of options compared to what they got there. And that has a whole lot to do with it.
When it's wet, they've got all sorts of options down here, and that's why we think what I try to think as a manager about, okay, how can we maintain that water on the landscape? How can we do our best to make sure what's under the water is as high as quality as it can be? We've done some research with our aerial waterfowl surveys. So we've been systematic with those for about 10 years now. Not as long a period of record as what they've got there in the coastal survey in Louisiana, but a similar type of survey, been running for about 10 years. We plugged in a whole bunch of different variables with a student up at the Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit up at University of Arkansas, recently graduated master's student, and down in Louisiana now. I believe he's at Tulane getting his PhD. But he looked at this stuff. John Herbert's his name. He looked at it, and you plug all this stuff in the box, and what comes out the end of it is what drives mallard numbers in Arkansas is the amount of surface water on the landscape. It's not weather north of us. That plays a role. But everybody thinks, well, it's got to be cold and snowy up there. Well, Mickey Hatmeyer said many years ago that when the White River bottoms flood, every mallard in the Mississippi Flyway knows it. And it doesn't matter if it's cold up north or not. The resources available in these river bottoms and this habitat throughout Arkansas is so extensive compared to everywhere else in the mid-continent mallard range that when it's available, the ducks come here. But again, we got to continue stay vigilant about what's under that. I got to go back to one thing. You mentioned GTRs here a second ago, and we haven't talked about that a lot here. And given where we are, super important issue here in Arkansas with green tree reservoirs. If people don't know what that is, we throw out acronyms like everybody knows them, but GTRs being green tree reservoirs, which are managed BLH, bottomland hardwood wetlands, and Arkansas has got the largest acreage of GTRs, these managed bottomland hardwoods, of anywhere in the country, and they're in extreme decline on public land, on private land alike. And so we're actively promoting changing our management practices. We talk about the ag landscape being having less resources for waterfowl now. We think about only having 10,000 acres of managed moist soil impoundments in state ownership. Again, lots of private landowners doing lots of good stuff too. You think about all these forested wetlands that are now impounded and managed by private landowners and public land managers, and those have experienced significant, we think, declines in habitat quality as well. So again, it's one more layer on top of this thing, of this decline in habitat quality, where we don't want to, I know from where I said, I don't want to look back in 20 or 30 years and think that we just let it all go and we let it all keep sliding away just because we kind of got complacent and thought, ducks are going to come to Arkansas. Mallards come to Arkansas. That's just what they do. We can't get complacent and not be active working on that. So as Game and Fish, we've devoted a ton of effort and energy to moving forward, changing our green tree reservoir management practices, and starting to get a lot more contacts from private landowners asking the same questions about, hey, can I do that on my GTR also? And so they want to be good stewards of the land too. They're seeing the changes. Like, man, we've been doing the same thing for 50 years, and boy, it's been fun. But what's going to happen 50 years from now? This place is going to be gone.
Thankfully, we have some very large private landowners with that mindset. And
they protected them 80 years ago.
Yep.
That's what's you can't forget is these private landowners own a substantial chunk of land out there that they have actively been preserving for decades, just like public land managers. And that's oftentimes forgotten. These private landowners they almost got more control than we do. They just got a bigger land base.
They do. Conservation starts with private lands. No question about it. We can't rely on the federal government and our refuge systems, as good as they are and as important as they are. They're funded with tax dollars.
Right.
And we all know when it comes to the acts and we cutting back on taxes and funding that
what's going first? Nobody's
going to care about a duck for the rest of the country when it comes to funding. And so your refuges, your state agencies are the first ones to get cut. So without the private landowner, we have no conservation. And so, and I've got to commend these guys here at Lone Cypress. This is probably my 5th or 6th year coming up here, and they're managing a small green tree reservoir, just like you talked about. And I've seen the evolution of their rules within the club. They've blocked off almost a third of their property to a no hunt zone, and they hunt outside of that area, and they leave that as a rest area. Simple things like stopping hunting at a certain time of the day, and everybody comes in. Don't ride the place in the afternoon to go joyride or look at things. Don't bump ducks. And I've seen a huge difference just in the amount of birds I've seen here just come to this one spot once a year, And so it just makes you wonder if everybody could have that mindset and sit down and develop a plan and do the best they can to create habitat. Maybe we could improve the situation. So I know we've been at this thing over an hour already, and Jimbo, you and I, we can talk till midnight tonight. We got to force ourselves to go to bed sometimes.
Right.
I know our listeners, we could continue to go on this. If there's one thing that we haven't covered, I'd like to give each of y'all an opportunity if y'all want to say something that we didn't cover, or is there a message out there, or where are we going with this? What do you think the second split's going to hold for the third split? What's the rest of the season for Arkansas?
Yeah, we need a rain.
Bad.
At this point, we need a rain. That just talked about, that surface water extent, that surface water flooding. Where we are, there's some folks that have some water that sometimes can really benefit from that only game in town phenomenon. But generally, we all do better, and the whole state does better when we've got a little bit more bred habitat availability. Most of the kind of mostly natural flooding rivers right now are on a fall. Things are kind of the white's coming up, but that's a little bit more than just rainfall driving that up.
Yeah, that's kind of artificial rise, but it's still a good one.
But it is. But
and I think there's going to be another release too later, as I understand.
Yep. So it looks like the White River is going to be having some of that managed release habitat provision, I guess, here for probably the rest of the season. But other rivers that rely more on rainfall and runoff I don't think they're definitely not on a rise right now. It doesn't seem. So we could definitely use it. That's what that sampling, like we were talking about, these birds flying around, whether it's a speckled belly flying the Gulf or whatever. We all know what it's like hunting these river bottoms on a rise, and that's when everybody wants to go do it, right? Whether it's biometa, we haven't had got a bunch of water down there, but haven't had a good push of water into there in a while. And that's kind of what gets those ducks wound up and gets them going. So I think that's going to really drive what we see as far as habitat availability for ducks and duck hunters for the next part of the season here. We've only 11 days into it, I guess, now, so we still got quite a few left. We're flying our next survey here the week of December 16th. We'll be flying another survey in the Delta, so we'll get a good idea of what's going on there with duck numbers. Weather temperature-wise looks nice. I mean, it's those type of nice sunny days and upper 40s and upper 20s type stuff that we all like. But not a whole lot of precipitation in the 10-day forecast.
Well, we created this series to get the message out there, because I think a lot of average hunters just don't realize all the details and the scientific data, and there's just so many variables that go into waterfowl management. And I think the habitat is catching everybody off guard. I mean, I'm a wildlife manager by trade, and I didn't realize some of the things that were going on in my backyard till it forced me to sit down and look at the data and say, oh my goodness, I can't believe that's all the rice we have in the area. And so when you start looking at it, it's very eye-opening. And so we're glad you guys sat down with us. And I know just this last Monday night, y'all had a meeting here up in Arkansas, kind of continuing some of the same concepts. So
we did.
I think we're getting the message out. I think you alluded to earlier about getting everybody to work together and realize we're all duck hunters, and so we kind of conclude every series that we had, at the end of the day, there's no one fix for this thing, and there's so many things that may be out of our control, but the one thing we can control, if you're a landowner and you're a duck hunter and you're a conservationist, is that we need to be talking habitat. And what can we do to improve the quality of it?
Yep.
So
absolutely.
Well, we appreciate both of you guys coming here. We know it's mid-afternoon; it's nap time at duck camp. So we appreciate you taking some time out of y'all's schedule to come here, and look forward to working with you in the future. I know you and I saw each other briefly at the Flyway Council meeting, and maybe we can get to do some of that more, and hopefully we can do another couple podcasts and maybe get up into some other states and see what some of the people in those parts of the country. It's always, we always sit, especially in our part of the country, and everybody's got a story of what's happening somewhere else, but they ain't never been there.
It's all about perspective.
When's the last time were you in Arkansas? They're holding all the birds. Well, when's the last time were you there? So to come talk to the people that are in the know in that area and find out really what's going on, to me, it's been very helpful, and hopefully we can continue to do that. So we thank all the listeners out there, and hope you all learned something from this one, and look forward to doing the next podcast somewhere else.
Man, thank you, Doug.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, guys.